Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
This is our classroom for a while, at least several months. If we need it when later fall comes, we have the opportunity to move back up in the hallway where we were at the other end. But right now, it doesn't have heating and air conditioning. So this is the best alternative we have. They're getting ready to redo the roof on that wing and then put in new heating and air conditioning. So that'll be it. Also, you may have noticed some of the other classes are having what we call fellowship, which means they're bringing in food and not having class. We didn't get that opportunity because nobody told me that was this week, but we will do that at another time. So I don't want anybody to feel left out. And in the short term, if you want a donut, they at least gave us some donuts here for this week. And we can do that more often if you like. So I asked somebody, why didn't we get notice about fellowship? Why, somebody should come and say, well, you guys are different. And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. They actually, a lot of people here actually think of us as being on a whole different track than everybody else, which is in some ways is good, in some ways maybe not so good. But at least we are distinguished, and people think, hopefully that correctly, that we are very serious about what we're doing here and try to get into things a little bit more deeply. So we will keep that up. As a notice, and I'm going to give you plenty of notice on this, in several weeks, and I'm not sure exactly how many, maybe 4 or 5, 6 weeks from now, we're going to have a class that is currently titled Science, Time, Social Ethics, and the Bible. And so we're going to cover a lot of ground, and we'll see if we can do it in one class. It may take 2. I'll probably see if some other classes want to join it. I think at every age in our church, we have people who are sitting here at least lightly conflicted with believing certain things and certain other things. Cognitive dissonance is what that's called when you hold 2 competing ideas at the same time. So I know that I know specifically people in our class are concerned about how can I talk about dinosaurs and times and hundreds of millions of years, and at the same time think that my Bible says the earth is only a few thousand years old. So we're going to start with that particular case, and we're going to move to a lot of other cases. We're going to cover a lot of ground with the hopes that when we get through, we'll all have at least a basis for how to approach those subjects, talk about them rationally with other people, and not look entirely foolish with people who hold competing ideas that we do. Come on in. Glad you found the room. So that'll be in a few weeks, or several weeks out. And so if you have specific questions around those topics, make sure you get them to me so I can cover more specific things. I'll cover things in general first, and then more specifically after that. But that's going to be one of the classes that I think will be more interesting than some of the things that other classes are going to be doing that week anyway. As I mentioned last week, I'm not too concerned about it, talking about any subject that impacts us. If we as Christians can't talk about any subject, we've got a problem. And in this day and age, you're not allowed to pick and choose what concerns you and what people talk about. So we will talk about anything you guys want to talk about. That's one of the reasons that I like the topics that we're on now, what I call one-hit wonders, because these one-hit wonders are designed to make you think more widely, to help you be more creative in how you approach the Bible, and hopefully in good ways. And the one that we have this week is, I think, a special example of that we'll be talking about. So hopefully all of you got to watch the video this week. If you didn't, I hope that you will. For those of you who, I see some newer faces in here, we're going to be doing eyewitness Bible videos. from the Eyewitness Bible series. And we're on a series under that called One Hit Wonders. And these are characters in the Bible that are either mentioned only one time, appear one time, something like that. And it's kind of modeled a little bit after the series that Mitch has done on Wednesday nights called One Hit Wonders. The thing about it that's a little challenging for people that grew up in the Church of Christ is a lot of us grew up thinking we can only talk about if it's specifically talked about in the scripture. And so we stay very close to the wording in scripture. But somehow in the back of our minds, we know that we're doing a lot of other stuff with that. You know, when it talks about a person, we start having in our minds something about that person or about that setting. So we're doing things in our minds, but we never really talk about it. So this particular one-hit wonder I really like because it takes a little bit that we know and then builds a story around it. And I like the story around it specifically for a couple of reasons. But it also makes me think, oh, there's other stories that could be built around this. There's other ways to look at this. And I think that's what gives the Bible a lot of depth when you can really see a story around it. So real briefly, I want to go through a couple of scriptures on how the story gets built, and then we'll talk about the video more. This is a New International Harmony of the Gospels. We've talked about this in class before. If you don't have this particular resource, it's really, really good. It's the Gospels put in parallel. So whatever version or whichever gospel you're looking at, if there's a similar passage in another gospel, it puts it right next to it. But the other thing that's really helpful with this, it puts it in chronological order as best they can. So you can read, this reads more like a novel than it does kind of disjointed stories like you get if you read some of the Gospels. This particular setting is for the feeding of the 5,000. And we see when you read this in the parallel, there's some interesting verses in one gospel that are not in the others. So the first verse is from John 6:6. When he's getting, this sets up the whole feeding of the 5,000. I'm going to start in verse 5, John 6:5. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" Verse 6, he asked this only to test him. Jesus already knew what was getting ready to happen, but he wanted Philip and by extension the rest of the apostles to think more deeply about what's getting ready to happen. And what are other solutions that they could have other than just the obvious ones? He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. So they're looking out and they're seeing approximately 5,000 men, which means there's probably in total maybe 10,000 people. It's a lot of people. And Philip can look at it and just freak out. How are we going to pay for this? Probably they don't have enough money to buy the bread, and he can't come up with any other solution. But this is going to be, in the end, when Jesus provides a solution, this is going to set the stage for a lot of things. So this isn't just a simple question. In Mark 6:38, and I'm going to drop back just a little bit. I'll drop back to verse 37 and pick it up. But Jesus answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, they being the apostles, "That would take 8 months of a man's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" So that almost insinuates they had a lot of money available to them. Is that what Jesus wants them to do with the money? Is to go spend bread? And this is Jesus's reply. How many loaves do you have? He asked. Go and see. So it appears that at this point, you have all these people out there, and they're just standing up in front, and Jesus has told them, go and see. So they have to go find out. So can't you see, you got 12 guys, and you got 10,000 people, and they're going to walk out and go, what do you have? What do you have? And what's going to be the natural inclination for everybody in the crowd to give them? I don't have anything. I don't want to share. Even if they have something, the natural inclination for people is to go, they're going to look around and go, I don't have anything. And these guys are wandering all through the crowd. And if I've never probably talked about this enough, but if you, the most likely place where this particular scene took place is on the Sea of Galilee. So the Sea of Galilee kind of looks like this. And up in this part right here, there's a natural hillside that works as a natural amphitheater. And you can't now, but before they planted in bananas, which they did a few years ago, you could stand at the top of this hillside and talk in a normal voice, and you could hear it hundreds of yards away. It was an unbelievable natural phenomenon. And a lot of people believe that's where this place took place. And when I think of this, I think about these 10,000 people scattered along this hillside. And Jesus is up at the top, and he's getting ready to teach. And these apostles now are going to filter through the whole crowd. And they get all the way to the bottom. It's probably, let's say, 150 yards. If they've been walking down the hill, and they got to walk all the way back up, and go, 11 of them go, nothing. We don't have any loaves. Except one of the apostles. So now we're going to go to John 6, and we'll go to, we'll finish up what I read a minute ago. Start at verse 7. Philip answered him, 8 months of wages would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here is a boy with 5 small loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go? I'm so many. So can't you imagine? 11 of them have nothing. Andrew's got this little boy, it looks like, brought him to Jesus. He's got this food. And somehow Andrew's got this idea. If I answered this question you asked me, or ask us, how many loaves do you have? So here's our answer. 5. And 2 little fish. But so what? What's that going to do among all of these people? So that's the setting for this video, if you got to watch it. And we know the rest of the story. Jesus multiplies the loaves and fishes. So that it becomes the symbol of a lot of things as we're going to go on. So let's go back and talk about the video for just a minute. For those of you who haven't seen the video, it has the setup is it's a mother who is a regular mom, except she's the mother of a special needs boy. And she wants her boy to be healed. And the video never says what's wrong with the son. It insinuates maybe something like a Down syndrome type of deal, because the boy's physically able to walk while he's mentally slow compared to the other boys and incapable. And with those disabilities, he's not going to be able to lead a typical life of a Jewish boy. He's not going to get to participate in synagogue the same way that the other boys would. He's not going to be a lot of things. And the mom, for the good of the boy, wants him to be healed. And so she goes to all sorts of lengths to get him in front of Jesus. Now, I should have stopped before I thought, how many of you were able to watch the video without crying? Anybody make it through? You did?
I mean, it was touching. What I was impressed with is your creativity.
Okay, so before we go there.
Before we talk about him.
Yeah.
Apparently I'm heartless, so.
Yeah, so you're out. It's a touching video.
Yes.
It is really touching. The background for that, by the way, is I wrote the first script, which I normally do. And the producer who also edits the scripts edited it with one of her friends in mind. So she had, excuse me, I missed on. Sorry, Don. I didn't see you on until just now. So she had a particular friend in mind who had a son with special needs. So she recast the whole script with her friend being the mother and the boy being the son. So where I had in mind kind of theoretical, she had a particular example and did a fabulous job because it really reads, I think, just exactly like it should. So at the end of the story, the boy is the only one in the crowd generous enough to offer his food. But then you finally get, oh, there's probably other people in the crowd that had food and just didn't offer it, which is a big lesson in itself. And then,
One I have never thought of, but that's a valid point. I'm literal when I read things. They didn't bring it. Well, why would they bring it? Everybody's going to be bringing something for themselves.
Yeah.
They're selfish. They don't want to offer it up.
Right. And so the little boy offers it, and he in the video he gets to go be with Jesus. And at the end, after he's with Jesus, Jesus asks the mom, "Okay, what do you want me to do for you?" That's another question that Jesus asks other people in the Bible. Is what do you want? To find out what their real heart is. And then the mother comes to realize she's the one that needs to be healed, not her son. And her heart needs to be healed, which is the lesson, obviously that goes to all of us. Is what do we really want? That's one thing that I think is always a question. When we come to Jesus, what do we really want? So I'm going to stay on that question a little bit, and then we'll move on. One of the things that impresses me about Tulsa, impressed is not in a good way necessarily, the impression I get, because of all the different churches we have and different types of churches we have in Tulsa, is how many people are Christians because they want to avoid going to hell and they would like to go to heaven. They're more interested in avoiding hell, but they really want to go to heaven. And that's kind of the underlying assumption of why many people are Christians, is for that sole purpose, is to avoid hell and go to heaven. Now, I'm not saying that critically because I spent a lot of years in that place because I thought that's what it was all about. This is all church is all about, going to heaven. So if Jesus would have said to me at times in my life, what do you want? I would have said, I want to go to heaven, right? That's the whole goal here. And he would have probably had to say, you don't get to go to heaven by wanting to go to heaven. That's not how you do this. And so I think that's a question. Why are we a church? What do we want from Jesus? We're told he's here, right? 2 or more of us together, he's here. What do we want? Jesus comes up, what are you here? What are you here for? Did you come here to hear a nice sermon? Did you come here to pray for your sick mom? What is it? If I can give you whatever you want, what is it you want? And if we even define that, do we even know why we go to church sometimes? I mean, a lot of people, it was obvious in COVID, a lot of people go to church, I'm saying this broadly. A lot of people go to church to hear a nice sermon, be around some people, and go home and kind of apply maybe a little bit of it during the week and then come back for another nice sermon. They come to church for the sermon because they want to be fed. I used to have a really close preacher friend, and I asked him, let me tip him. I asked my preacher friend, who was very well known at the time, so what do you do for a living? He said, I feed fat sheep. And I thought that was the best description I'd ever heard of churches, is they're full of people who are fat sheep who come back to get fatter. And that's the purpose they go. Or is our purpose more to, as I just think about the service we had today. Mitch offered one reason why we're here is to help other people. We gave money to Contact. We work together to help other people. Or we can come in an effort to learn how to make disciples better. There's a lot of reasons we could do, but if Jesus said, what do you want? What would we answer? That should be a big question that we should have on our minds, because that's really the question Jesus often asks in the Bible. So I'm going to let that just sink in a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to switch topics a little bit. Another thing that I think was fun for me in the video was to start thinking about the question, how did Jesus choose who he was going to heal? And if you read the stories, and this is another really good reason to have this and read it, is if you read this and you really watch Jesus chronologically, there are many times when he heals people physically. That's all he's doing. He spent all day, it appears, healing people physically. And then at the end of the day, it's cut off and it's over. And the next day he's either somewhere else or he's doing something. There's also many days where he's preaching and teaching. There's a lot of days he does both. So how did Jesus decide? How did he decide, I'm going to quit healing people right now, and everybody else in line doesn't get healed physically? I mean, that's really what's going on. He is choosing to heal and not to heal. How do you make those choices? How does he make them today? How does he choose to heal you when maybe the next guy in the next room doesn't get healed? And people may pray just as hard for that person in the next room. How does God make these choices?
I think you need to ask, what's the purpose of the healing? What's the purpose of the healing? Is he healing someone to build up someone else's faith? Or is it solely just to heal that person because there's something else for that person to do? So,
Well, it's not necessarily just
right. So, I mean, we could say the healing was just solely for the healing, but was it really? Or was it much more purposeful than that? Was it to draw people to him? Was it just for them to see who he is and what his powers are and to want more of him? I mean, that would be part of
how it affects their families
right.
over a long period of time. I mean, it's it. How many of you ever got to see, I think it's the Jim Carrey movie where he was God for a period of time? You remember? What was the name of it? Bruce Almighty. If you haven't seen the Bruce Almighty movie, it's pretty fun. And it's got some really good scenes. And one of them is when he's trying to answer prayers. And one one person's praying for rain because they need rain, another person's praying for it not to rain because they need rain. And he's getting all these prayers up, and he's trying to answer the prayers. And it's pretty interesting to think that's our God. He in some respects, he's up there getting the prayers. And these are prayers of the saints. These are like incense, as we're told in Revelation. How does God make those choices? How do we react to the choices that he makes when he heals or doesn't? And I think one of the things that we come to is that even if he heals somebody physically, they're going to die. This physical healing is very temporary. I think about the way I viewed COVID differently than a lot of people. A lot of people said, COVID killed 1 million people in the U.S. I think was about the number. It got to was about 1 million. COVID didn't kill 1 million people. COVID killed 1 million people so that they lived 5 years less than they would have lived if they hadn't, on the average, if they hadn't had COVID. COVID sped up the times of their death. It wasn't that they weren't going to die anyway. In fact, in the early days of COVID, it was less than 3 years because it was just killing old people who were already real sick anyway. And then it kind of came on down after that. But Jesus knows, even if he heals these people physically, they're going to die. And it's a very temporary thing. So his concern more often is, it appears, the spiritual life. How do I affect their spiritual life? And how do I affect the spiritual life of others? As we were talking about. How about other questions? Anybody, as you watched that video, were there any other thoughts that you came up with that were kind of wider than just the feeding of the 5,000? Although that's pretty wide in itself. But anything strike you as a...
I loved her perspective and the frustration that she, to have a child that she knew was not going to have the typical journey. He can only memorize this many songs, he can't memorize this many, and they were sort of very isolated, and her frustration, she's lost her husband, et cetera, and she's going out she's getting up earlier and earlier each morning, and she gets there and it's a sea of people. And she knows, I'm never going to get up front. I'm never going to get up front. And then, and asking why, why can't I be in the front? And then the one morning she gets there and she is in the front, she realizes he's not there, and that's why she's in the front. All of that, and the frustration of, this is my chance to have my child healed and to give him the typical Jewish life, and that really wasn't what was in store for her child. It wasn't what was in store for her. And then to have it be where she finally got up to him because of her child's reaction of sharing something he had, it was very interesting. It's very interesting.
So do we get frustrated like that? Why are we why did God put me in this circumstance? I didn't think that, why did God let me make a really high number on my MCAT and then I can't get into medical school right now? The frustrations, and I use that as an example. I hope I didn't talking out of place. But, I mean, everybody knows it.
Yeah.
But I mean, the issues that we've all had, like, gosh, God, I'm doing everything you asked from me, and this isn't turning out. And we never say, but like, this didn't turn out like I want. Right? I really thought if I was a good kid and I didn't cuss and I didn't have premarital sex and everything, I was going to have a really great. It's like, no, I didn't get the job I wanted. In my case, I'm living in Gainesville, Texas. Like, this is not what I had in mind.
I think some of us have been blessed from the day we were born to have strong Christian families. And so everybody in this room, I'm sure, has something where they've had a sick child or they've had drug issues with kids, different things. And by starting your whole life depending on God, you do want to go to heaven, but you're dependent on God And with all the illnesses and all the things that you had to face, you don't blame God. You don't ask God why. It just makes you stronger. And but that's when people, like, I've been blessed to every time I was in the hospital, my mother prayed over me continually. If I cried, she came and prayed. So I always just knew when people would say, you don't deserve certain things, I'm like, I never felt that way, because God, and I do have an autistic grandson I'm raising, and it is challenging, but he's who he is. And it takes going through it to see what a great person he is. And he will be something someday, whether you have a Down syndrome or whatever you have, you're, you're dependent on God. You might not always question him. You might just accept it.
So those of you in Zoom land, so they can't always hear, we're talking about how nice it is sometimes to grow up in church, because you learn not to question, I guess, God in some respects, but you depend on him more. And your viewpoint of disadvantages is a little different than some.
Yeah, and whatever works, whatever happens, then because of the continued God is in charge, and how you love him, and that's why you want to be what you do, and you depend on all that, you have a peace.
Okay.
Just knowing if you pass away, it's okay.
So you have the peace that comes with understanding God's in charge.
Not just you don't have a bad day,
yeah.
But it seems like when you stop and pray earnestly to God, you get peace, knowing it's going to be okay.
Good. That's something we get, other people don't get to have.
Yeah, I mean,
this peace.
That's one of the things that I'm continuing to learn, especially coming out of what I did, is God has a plan. It's not kids' plan. I want to lean into God's plan. We are leaning into God's plan. That's one of the things that our family is desiring to do more and more. It's not my plan. It's his plan. Lord, what do you have planned for me?
I like that. Again, to zoom in, it's what does God have planned for me? How do I lean into his plans? Because I think a lot of us have grown up in a world where we thought if we did specific actions, that was what God wanted from us, as opposed to a specific lifestyle. And part of that lifestyle being following God's plan. These are the resources God gave me. I don't get the outcome necessarily, but as long as I'm using the resources God gave me, I'm within his will. And that's what I want to do, is lead a lifestyle that's pleasing to him. Yeah. Any other thoughts, anything?
Just along those lines, one thing that I struggle with is, you always hear about God opened these doors or closed these doors. And when do you know that the door is closed versus you're just stubborn and you keep trying? And I mean, I guess there's just this struggle of how do you just lean in, and tell me what to do versus I think I know what to do kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it does or doesn't work out.
Yes, and so the question was, how do you know when you're following God's plan or when you're just being stubborn, especially when doors are open? We talk about doors being opened or doors closed, which I'm not sure is a perfect Bible concept, but we use that terminology all the time. Yeah, and it's really interesting. For instance, with prayer, Jesus says, just like, be persistent. I keep getting these no answers, and he says, be persistent. But at the same time, how do we realistically know when it's over? And I think that's a hard question. That's not easy. But I think sometimes, and this is my view, sometimes it's not so much he's worried about you getting to the right answer as he is you struggling with the question and making sure you're wanting to be in his will. that there's not always just one right answer. I think it's the process that God wants you to go through that puts you in the right place. And we, especially as Americans, we always think it's this way or this way. One of them's better than the other. And we're very outcome-based people. And I think Jesus a lot of times does this process, like this whole story of the feeding of 5,000, it's the process. That's the big thing that's going on to start with. Is he wants these apostles to go through this process of learning that he's powerful, that God provides all of these things. Because the very next stories that come up after this is people just wanting to feed him. He already sees they want to be followers just because I'll give them food. And he knows that's going to be an outcome, but he's got to live with it to go through the rest of the process. So a lot of times I think we, as Americans, get in a little space that isn't exactly right. But those are hard. I was thinking this morning about Mitch's terminology about we pray to keep people out of heaven, which I thought, I never heard it phrased exactly. That's right. But they get ready to die. I go, no, we don't want you to die.
So the apostles had obviously already seen Jesus perform miracles like the wine at the wedding. I think there was also another feeding before this one, was there not? Why didn't they automatically just go, oh, he's gonna do it again?
Oh, that's such a great question.
It would be presumptuous of them, but they knew he could do it.
So Susan was asking a question. The apostles had already seen Jesus do miracles, and he's putting them to the test. And very clear, he puts them to the test. And I'm not sure what the test is. That would have been interesting. He put him to the test. Can I have a little bit more color on that, please? But we don't get exactly what that test is. He was putting them to.
Well, Jesus did say, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" That was his question in John 6. Where are we going to go buy the bread?
Okay, so John 6, where?
6:5.
Yeah, where shall we buy? Yeah, he's putting the way that is phrased here. Yeah, he's leading Philip kind of this deal, but to the test.
Because then again, why didn't Philip just go, we don't need to buy this?
Yeah. Okay, so now we're banging on the apostles, right? But we're the same way, right? We've watched Jesus do all sorts of healings, and both physical and spiritual, and everything, and yet we have a hard time remembering that and asking for that, for the solution. We in business a lot of times we talk about give me the out of the box solution. That's mostly if I could think of it, it's not out of the box, but that's what he wants. And so I'm gonna end it with this, because this is a way that Mitch has phrased it several times when he and I have our conversations, which is your faith informing your intellect, or is your intellect informing your faith? Which one of it takes, which one is overriding? And I always go, once I really think about it, my intellect is overriding my faith very often. And Jesus is saying, let your faith override your intellect. You've watched me do miracles. Let that be what informs your choice. And when you do that, then you can think of solutions other people can't think of.
It's sort of a lived so which one overrides the other?
So your mind or your heart? We're going to end it there. Thank you guys. I hope you liked the video. Next week is an entirely different type. So hopefully you'll get a chance. We'll we'll do some other things.
So when we were dying last year, we were so close to death. It was just like, oh, I don't know. I didn't know what to ask. So, okay, I'm okay to go. I'm okay. All right, and then we did die. So my prayer changed, and it's do what he did. He says, "Oh, Father, let it, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but yours." And that's just when someone says we pray for them, yeah, not necessarily saving from death, because maybe the death is Satan,
So the prayer is,
right?
your
My
will
prayers
be
have
done.
changed.
Yeah. It's like,
I'm not trying, I'm with Mitch. Don't try to keep people out of heaven to live 5 more years. I have a friend who's my age, I'm 57, and she and her husband were sick, and they prayed 15 more years, like Hezekiah. Today, he lived 15 more years, and he's, you know, he still died young. But he's like, oh my goodness, trusting he has the plan, and you don't. You just go, okay, I did what I was supposed to do, let it be. Whatever's going to happen, I know it's your plan. That's what I want. What I want, because my plan messes things up.
and I think sometimes that terminology of your plan is not as biblical as praying your will. Your will be done. I think that's what we really,
Sure.
if
But
we,
he already knows what's going to happen. I mean, it's already there.
Yeah.
Now, I do think he can change his mind. I think it's a petition to change his mind if it's his will, if it
What?
follows his will.
so we had a good example of that today's sermon. Anybody catch that when God changed his mind? Did you, people of Nineveh? It specifically says in that verse, God changed his mind
Not to destroy it.
not to destroy them.
So I
So
want to ask a question, because that's where I sometimes have conversation with a friend. She's always saying, God knows right now whether you're going to heaven or not. And I'm like, how does he know? I mean, what if I decide to mess up? What if I decide to say I'm done? I mean, so that, I mean, I'm not questioning, but I know I am. So I'm like, how does he know what I'm going to do? Or how does he know where I'm going to end up?
oh, great. Okay, you just gave me, I told you we were going to talk about hard subjects. So one of the subjects we will talk about then, in coming, it'll be more than a month from now, is the foreknowledge of God. Because that encompasses that sort of thing. If you've been around churches, different churches teach lots of different things about the foreknowledge of God. So we will make that a topic. And among that topic comes things like assurance of salvation and other things. We'll spend some time on. So we will get to that some later. I can't give you the quick answer because there's not one.
I'd like to hear others' opinion, because
Yeah.
I feel like I'm really, I'm talking to her and anyway, she'll just say, he already knows. I'm like, I can't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. And I'm not,
We will have a really good discussion on foreknowledge God. It's one of the most interesting topics there is, and it affects a whole lot of things. So I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. So there you go. Grab a donut on the way out if there's still anyone home.
Yeah, thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Oh.